Our next lunch speaker is new to the NCMA stage. Here to introduce him is not someone who is new, that hopefully everyone will recognize, our very own Miss Ann Rung, who is now the Director of the Public Sector at Amazon Business. Ann.
Good afternoon. It's tough to follow a cartoon character. So it's my pleasure to introduce my colleague at Amazon Business, Daniel Smith, as well as my former federal government colleague, Elliott Branch. So Daniel leads our education team at Amazon Business, working to bring the Amazon Marketplace to institutions of higher ed, K through 12 schools, and the education community at large. He has over 20 years experience in the technology industry, including stints at Amazon Kindle and Dell Computers. And he is the perfect person to lead our education team at Amazon Business. He is the son of educators. He loves to wear tweed jackets. And he's extremely thoughtful and professorial in his approach to his job. Elliott Branch is Deputy Assistant Secretary of the Navy, overseeing the Navy's global multi-billion-dollar acquisition system, and I know you all know Elliott. And prior to joining the Navy's acquisition executive staff, he led NAVSEA's $25 billion shipbuilding and weapons procurement program. And his impressive career has also included years in the private sector, as well as serving as Chief Procurement Officer for the District of Columbia. So having worked with both Elliott and Daniel, I think they're the perfect team to speak to you today about how technology can solve some of the biggest challenges in the public procurement space. They're both extremely bright. They're both contrarians, very outspoken, and very, very smart. So I welcome Daniel and Elliott to the stage. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for the kind introduction. Let's have a round of applause for Ann. Very excited to have you at Amazon. Ann Rung introducing me at this conference is a little bit like buying a ticket to go see Paul McCartney perform. And Sir Paul comes out at the big night and does one song, and then you find out that Ringo Starr is doing the rest of the set. So you'll have to bear with me as I try to channel as much of Ann's and Elliott's knowledge here in this august group. I'd also like to point out that I think this is a high watermark of private sector and public sector collaboration when the guy from that used to live in the Silicon Valley and works for a West Coast technology company is wearing a tie, and Mr. Branch has an open collared shirt. So it's a big moment. It's a big moment. So why is Amazon at a government contracting conference? Who let the fox into the henhouse? Let me talk to you a little bit about the origin story of the part of Amazon that Ann and I work at, which is called Amazon Business. And I think it might help frame some of the conversations that Elliott and I would love to have with you today. So several years ago, Amazon is a data-driven company. Several years ago, we looked at who was purchasing on Amazon.com, the consumer website side of our business. And what we found is there were literally millions of public sector buyers. We knew this because of the email domain of their account. They were using a purchase card to buy things of a wide variety of categories on Amazon. And we wanted to learn more. We wanted to understand what was driving that behavior. And so we started to talk to end users. These are individuals in defense and civilian federal government agencies, state and local governments, education organizations that are in the public sector. And probably for many of the same reasons that you love Amazon, phenomenal selection, pretty good pricing, a really great brand promise that when we say something is going to be shipped and show up, it usually shows up as ordered in time. Those are the reasons why individuals inside of many of your organizations loved Amazon. We got a warm, glowing, enthusiastic response from those end users. Then we started talking to people who have the titles that you might have, business officers, contract managers, procurement officials, and I promise you, because I experienced this firsthand, we did not always get such a warm and welcoming reception. In fact, one of the first meetings I ever had when I moved from the Kindle division at Amazon to Amazon Business, I did kind of a road show of meeting with various folks in the government and education contracting space. And one gentleman very politely referred to me as Voldemort, because Amazon is the supplier that shall not be named in his organization. So I think what's implicit in that story is this tension, this very interesting tension that I've observed between end user choice, people wanting to be able to buy what they want, when they want, from whatever supplier they choose, to really drive the things that they need for their mission. And that's important. On the other hand, and what creates that tension is a very real need for organizational compliance. And I want to talk a little bit about organizational compliance. So again, coming from the West Coast technology company, I spend a lot of time speaking with colleagues who are unfamiliar with government contracting. And compliance in many people's minds is bureaucracy. It's unnecessary bureaucracy. And one of the things that I think Ann and I are beginning to help change the conversation with our colleagues at Amazon, but really in the broader technology space, and procurement technology in particular, is that compliance really plays two important roles. You sitting in this room as contract managers, as government contract managers, and procurement professionals and business officers, have a fiduciary duty to your organizations and to taxpayers to ensure that money is used and allocated in an appropriate way, that the things that are being purchased are fit for purpose, or fit for mission. And the other part of compliance is creating an efficient and effective purchasing organization to ensure that we're not just spending transactionally, but we're developing relationships with suppliers that provide value for the long term. And those two compliance elements are really important. And so you've got choice that in many senses, Amazon and companies like us have helped accelerate this end user choice, this idea that you can buy from literally tens of millions of SKUs or items on Amazon. The fact that we have over 2 million sellers on Amazon.com today that individuals can buy from, that you can buy on your desktop computer or your smartphone. Increasingly now with products like Echo and our Alexa voice services, you can order with your voice over an easy-to-use, intuitive service. All of these things are driving choice on the one hand for end users, and really the consumerization of procurement and increasingly professional procurement and sourcing. And on the other hand, this phenomenon that's not going away, that is structurally embedded in what we all do, which is this compliance element. And so what we want to talk about a little bit today is how technology and new ways of thinking about contracting and procurement, as opposed to having to face these trade-offs between compliance and choice, that technology and new models can begin to accomplish both of these goals. A great end user experience, the putting the choice closer to where the mission is, while at the same time satisfying some of these compliance requirements. And I want to talk to you about three phases of that that I think started about 15 years ago and leading up to, I think, the phase we're in now, the third phase we're in now, which I think we need to think about deeply together and have a dialogue together about what that third phase is. So let me talk about these briefly. First of all, the phase one that I think started about 15 years ago that was really brought about by e-procurement software, enterprise resource planning software suites, was what I call the digitizing the bureaucracy. This was taking a set of steps, a set of approvals and workflows and processes that existed in paper or between human interaction, and digitizing those and putting those online or in a system that could be used. And there were some huge efficiencies that we saw because of those investments in technology and business process reengineering. The second phase, which is I would argue the phase we're in today, is really data-driven decision-making. So because of those technology investments and advances in big data, we now have the ability to drive strategic sourcing initiatives through the visibility into what's being purchased, better demand signals, better tools to be able to identify what the people in the field need to accomplish their missions. Some of the efforts that Ann led in the federal government are really reflective of that current phase. I think this third phase that I would encourage us to think about, maybe have a dialogue about today, really I think can go back to first principles. What are the first principles, those core foundational suppositions about the role of procurement, the role of government contracting, the needs of those end users, the fundamental compliance components that are not there because of history or tradition or practices that we're all familiar with, but the elements of compliance that need to be there to accomplish the goals that we all have. How do we go back to those core principles? How can we move to a phase which I would argue could be called compliance as a service? So you're all familiar with software as a service or infrastructure as a service. Amazon Web Services was a pioneer in this space where we took provisioning an IT server from weeks or months, where an individual would have to call an IT professional, they'd order the server, they'd rack and stack it, and then they'd provision it and the applications on that. We took that process of weeks and months and turned it into minutes or hours. What does that look like in our industry, in our segment? How can we provide compliance as a service it's seamless and invisible to the end user, but still satisfies the fiduciary duties that we have? And that needs to be a conversation. That is not going to be the West Coast technology company flying in and having a best practice that worked in the commercial and private sector organizations and imposing that on government and public sector contracting. That doesn't work. We need a dialogue to build these new solutions. And so I invite you, as you're finishing up lunch and hearing some of the dialogue that Elliott and I have here, get out your apps, submit questions, thoughts, ideas, and Elliott and I will kick off that discussion. But this new phase, this new phase of government contracting aided by technology is really first and foremost an organizational and a people solution. And so let's dialogue about that together.
Great. Daniel, thank you. That's a great start. That's a great start. So I want to start where you finished. The idea that there are some first principles in this business, and that what we need to do is get back to them. Can you talk about, from your perspective, what some of those first principles might be? And in addition to that, can you help us think through how technology and the use of technology in this space might actually modify those principles?
Yeah, so I think one of the first principles is transparency.
Okay.
Transparency in who's buying what from whom. Transparency in the price that's being paid. And oftentimes, this is not a government-specific comment, it's a general business-to-business comment. Pricing is not always transparent. There's not always visibility in what one supplier is charging one agency or company. I think that another core principle is accountability. And it's tied to, but I think separate from transparency, is there accountability that the things that we're buying actually fulfill the missions of what we're buying them for, they fit for purpose. And I think a third core principle, or kind of foundational grounding element, is this idea of creating real economic engagement, in HubSpot vendors, in diversity and socioeconomically diverse suppliers, and buying local and buying small business. These are goals that many of our organizations and agencies have, and I think ensuring that we provide that economic opportunity are important. And I think technology can play a role in providing open catalogs and marketplaces where individuals can buy, where the price is not supplier to contractor. It's more open and transparent. And I'll give you an example on the economic development side, where Amazon is really deeply invested, for example, in supporting small business and socioeconomically diverse suppliers. About 40% of what businesses, not on the .com side, but on the Amazon business side, about 40% of what individuals buy from Amazon today are not from Amazon selling it. It's from one of our 2 million suppliers, many of which have diversity and small business designations. And so we're really think about technology in that sense as driving some of those opportunities for those types of organizations.
Okay, I hear that, but I also am concerned about that, especially in the space that I'm in, the defense piece, where we try to vet our vendors. And the other thing is, you're a global company. And we're running up against, I think, some values issues. So we have humans clause, or human trafficking clause. So what we've got a value system in this country around what subsistence labor should be, how people should be treated in the workplace, how people should be treated outside the workplace, what those practices are. As a global company, how do you help us live with those things? Because, my sense is, you could help us build a marketplace, but it could turn out to be one that isn't consistent with American values. The other issues are just sourcing certain things. I'm not sure that I want certain microelectronic circuitry from certain countries of origin in my systems. So how do we kind of deal with that as we're trying to build this marketplace where the concerns of government may not be the same ones that a consumer has, and actually state actors and non-state actors can act to actually make this a national security issue?
No, that's a great question. I think the bar for Amazon and other companies like us needs to be high, not just when we're serving public sector or government organizations. It needs to be high even when it's an individual buying for their own personal purposes. And so we agree. We believe that accountability for where items are sourced, whom they're sold by, and the standards that those resellers and manufacturers are held to needs to be high. And so Amazon has, just to use my company as an example, has set high bars and standards in terms of quality and on-time delivery, some of the more operational elements. We're now beginning, we have tens of thousands of suppliers now who are certified with Small Business Administration designations of those organizations as being small business or a diversity seller. But I think increasingly, that bar, like I said, needs to be high across, no matter who's buying, but particularly when we move into the government space and public sector. We're going to increasingly apply tests to those suppliers and hold those suppliers to account to ensure that their labor standards, their hiring practices, their sourcing standards comply with the requirements that those in this room that buy have.
So how do you make a profit? As we bring you into that, look, you've got shareholders, and they are interested in, I'll argue, like 4 things. It's about revenue, it's about margin, it's about cash flow, and it's about backlog. So how do you come into this space where we think about those problems very differently than a free market might think about, a truly free market may think about those problems, and satisfy your stockholders, because they'll walk away from you if you're not giving them the kind of return they're looking.
Yeah, I think this is one of the best parts of working at Amazon, is that we are myopically focused on our customers. We have this fundamental belief, and this is core to our product development life cycles. It's core to our economic and financial decisions, that if we start with our customers and understand the requirements they have of who they buy for and what procurement technology looks like and how to support government contracting, we delight customers. The financial and profitability and sort of acclaim components of doing business follow. Yeah. And I think we've seen that in every new segment that we've entered.
Okay, but so how do you not become the next Seagate Technologies? those were the guys that said, hey, our customers want 5.25-inch hard drives because our customers are desktop customers and they miss the whole disruptive, wave of 3.25 and 2.25-inch drives. And they're now not the dominant player in that market. So how are you thinking about making sure you get to that next generation of customers, which in a government space, many are sitting here. I mean, I'm going to be retired when some of these people are going to be making the strategic decisions that you need to stay alive.
Yeah. No, I think it's because we're focused on customers. I would argue that when you get focused on protecting profit pools and entrenched businesses, this is the innovator's dilemma, right? That's when you start protecting old ways of doing business and old technologies. But when you're listening to customers, you are pushing the boundaries of business models on behalf of those customers, not to serve the interests of the company, but to delight customers. That's when you can begin looking around corners and take innovative big bets. You look at how Amazon operates. We take some pretty bold bets. Some of them work, and some of them are very high-profile learning opportunities for us. And I think that's how you continue to innovate.
So that leads me to a question from our audience here. Somebody would like to know what you've learned since you've moved into this federal space, and were there any surprises?
Yeah, no, I think some of the things that perhaps surprised us most were the speed at which the consumerization of purchasing is happening, even in organizations that take a very conservative view to contracting. This idea that end users want to be closer, the people who are most responsible for delivering on the mission have the best idea of what needs to be purchased for an organization, and they find a way to buy. And I think the procurement card program from the GSA is an example of being nimble and being able to identify mission opportunities and be able to act on those quickly to satisfy need. But on the flip side, I think the other thing that's been that we've learned is the need to continue to partner with on the contracting and business officer side of the house. With providing real data to make decisions and tools to help set those compliance policies without having to have these trade-offs with the end user. Blocking. The last thing we want is for contracting and procurement to block those end user decisions, but you have to create that balance. And so I think the goal, the challenge that we have now is how do we kind of bridge that gap?
Well, so how are you thinking about that? Because here's the concern that I have. Jet's in that space now. Walmart has gone off and bought them. They understand that they've got to figure out how to catch up with you here. You're probably ahead of them in terms of this idea of moving into the government space and this idea of compliance as a service. So as a contracting officer, I immediately get suspicious. It's like, okay, so how do I not let them into that business model? And how do you protect my interest while protecting your interests when you provide compliance as a service?
One of the things that perhaps surprised me a little bit and was an important learning for us as an organization is that when you have central contracting procurement functions whose jobs are to identify demand, aggregate that demand, match that demand with supply, and negotiate contracts that are representative of the services and terms and conditions and pricing needs of the agencies and organizations that those contracting officials serve. And then you have this consumerized process that begins to etch away and eat away at the potency and efficacy of those contracts because it's off-contract spending. We need to bring those things together. And I think you do that in a way that, as opposed to having these P card purchases and off-contract purchases happening outside of the contracting process, absorb that into the contracting process. And you do that with data, you do that with transparency. And I think organizations like Amazon can help there because we are providing the ability to not only purchase, and this is, I think, really central to our strategy of how you begin to address some of these compliance issues. How do you address Amazon living side by side strategic sourcing initiatives? Is that you stop thinking of an Amazon as a retailer or a supplier, and you start thinking of Amazon potentially. I would posit to this group as a technology partner that can allow individuals to purchase off their core central contracts that have been negotiated by central procurement and contracting on a marketplace that's Amazon or Amazon-like. But at the same time, perhaps for other items or other commodity categories, also purchase from the open marketplace, and all that can exist in one place. And the advances in data and technology allow you as the fiduciaries of your organizations, as the contract managers of your organizations, to see all of that in one place.
So you're going to have to help me figure out how to then develop my workforce because this is how generally this happens. So I take young people out of college and I start them out transactionally. Almost, the analogy I like to use is, this is like they're coming out of medical school and they're going to work in a teaching hospital. And out of those interactions, those continuous interactions, what happens is they, who are probably the most complex adaptive machines that I can ever put, to bear on this problem, develop the ability to see patterns, develop the ability to extend those patterns into strategies to get to those contracts that you want to provide the technological solution for. But if I take away the transactional work, how do I develop those people?
Yeah, it's a phenomenal question. I think talent development and organizational change management are some of the really at the cornerstone of bridging the gap from this sort of data-driven decision-making phase we're in now to this compliance as a service phase that I talked about. I think there's probably three components. One, I think government contracting needs to be a career path. And I think that career path starts in a grounding in public policy and the fundamental kind of core principles of public policy. I think secondly, it's being more versed and comfortable in technology use and social buying. So we recently did a survey just in the public sector education space that found about 67% of researchers and faculty in education make a decision first and foremost about what their peers are buying, what their peers are saying, not what's on a approved items list or a negotiated mandatory contract. And so I think the workforce of the future in government contracting, I would argue, needs to be versed in social selling, getting signaling about what to buy and how to buy it. And then I think the last piece is really, if you think about a procurement or a contracting organization, nearly every dollar from non-labor and benefits dollars are flowing through these offices, and thinking about taking that strategic lens off, and not just having a source to sell or procure to pay mentality, but thinking about how a strategic sourcing organization can begin to provide value across the mission of the agencies and organizations they serve. And I think that looks like coming up with new ways to find demand, new ways to fill that demand with supply. And I think it really is taking the blinders off from just a procure to pay and looking at the holistic organization.
Okay, so would you describe those kind of as the competencies for this next generation contract specialist? What you said, that grounding in public policy, the ability to do social buying, that data. I think about this, and I think about this in the context of especially a lot of our life sciences agencies, because they're an interesting group of people. I dealt with them as a consultant, and folks from the VA can talk to them. We've dealt with them on IT solutions in the Department of Defense. I don't want them making choices, okay? It reminds me of a math problem that my daughter, brought home in middle school. She was asked by the teacher how many cars would a dealer have to keep in stock to satisfy every demand? And my daughter, not being a car person, picked a Chevy. And when we got through with the math, the number was 8,397. If she picked a Toyota, the number would have been 120.
Yeah.
Right? So why do I want every doc in a VA hospital deciding he can buy the kind of sutures he wants to buy, or buy the kind of clamps, or buy the kind of scalpels he wants to buy? And I'm concerned you're leading me into that world with this customer empowerment, where I really need, in order to efficiently run government, some level of standardization to deliver services to the taxpayer.
Yeah, and I think this is where technology really can play a role. And again, there are some organizational and foundational capability and competencies that I think need to lead this conversation. Technology does not lead this conversation, but one of the things technology does enable is the ability to search for anything, look for anything, try to source anything. Those become really helpful demand signals to us as central procurement organizations about how are our businesses and missions changing? How do I need to adapt and grow as an organization to support those changing mission needs? But at the same time, looking at it practically from a cost perspective, the supply chain and the contracting organizations can't satisfy infinite permutations of what someone needs to buy. And I think that's where technology can seamlessly, hopefully invisibly, begin to provide boundary conditions and underlying heuristics and rules that begin to aid the folks that we serve, our clients, our customers, our end customers, to buy in the most efficient and effective way. Let me give you a specific example of what that might look like in Amazon's context. So if I'm searching for, talked about lab and life sciences, if I'm buying something as innocuous as a beaker, there may be 30 different options for that beaker from 25 different suppliers on Amazon today. But one of the ways that we can begin to shape and shift the demand and not limit, but sort of guide the choice for those is what comes up first in search relevancy. So when I search for a beaker, what's at the top of that list and what's on page 16 in that list? Is there messaging and guidance that I can provide to those end users about the benefits of buying from this supplier versus others? Are there ways that we can filter and signal through ratings and recommendations and reviews what the best supplier, the most trustworthy and reliable suppliers are, the most standardized and most useful beaker, or whatever the commodity, product, or category might be? So I think these are ways that we can, that are not intrusive or burdensome to the end user. They don't slow the end user down in what they're buying, begin to guide and reduce the number of permutations that we talk about.
So is your CEO going to suggest to the incoming Trump administration that we outsource the General Services Administration to you?
Well, you promised to be provocative, Elliott, and you have delivered, my friend. So we are really focused. We believe that the core mission of the federal government, state and local governments, higher education institutions is not going to change. And we are really committed to focusing on serving those constituencies. And we think that's relevant in any administration.
Okay. So, but I hear you talking about a business model and a platform that seems very similar to what GSA does. So how would you draw a distinction between what they do and what you do, so that I don't come to the logical conclusion, hey, I'm just going to go to Jet, and I'm going to go to Amazon, and I'm going to go to a bunch of systems integrators, and I'm going to figure out how to way to just kill the GSA.
Amazon, let me take a page out of the book of our colleagues from Amazon Web Services. This is the cloud computing and a portion of Amazon. They do many other things, but it started as a cloud computing division of Amazon. How did AWS start? AWS started by Amazon building compute power and storage that we required to serve our consumer customers. And then we took that technology and leveraged it and sold it as a service to Fortune 1000 companies, federal agencies, state and local government, education organizations, and the public sector. I think that's a pretty good indicator, without talking about our future roadmap and some of the things we're thinking about, but I think it's a pretty good indicator of how Amazon thinks about engaging with organizations. We're not there to supplant and replace, we're there to enable and empower.
Okay.
And what that means is that think about the assets that Amazon has from a supply chain perspective of route optimization and delivery, what to store in your warehouse or fulfillment centers, what to put on a website and what not to put on an e-commerce website. These are core competencies that Amazon has been great at. How to create a dynamic competitive marketplace, how to lower prices through that competition. These are things that Amazon has been great at for 15 or 20 years now. It's not that we think we're great at it. Our customers have voted with their buying behaviors, and they've told us that we're great. We want to be humble. We want to listen to what government agencies require. We want to talk to the GSAs of the world, and we want to understand what those needs are. And then we want to bring technology solutions to bear that enable and empower GSA and other organizations to be more efficient and effective. We're not here to replace, we're here to partner.
So it sounds like my friends at GSA may be safe for a minute or two at least, but it also sounds like my friends from the Defense Logistics Agency maybe have something to worry about.
Yeah.
So no, I mean, very seriously, because what I heard in your answer was, look, we built things so we could be a successful business in a free market economy, in the marketplace. And then we brought those things to bear for other people because we had learned things to be really, really good at that stuff. So it sounds like this whole supply chain piece, people like FEMA, people like Defense Logistics Agency, other folks that are in that business on behalf of the taxpayer might benefit from that experience out of that adjacent market. So I want to ask you, because we talked a little bit about your background before we started having this conversation, and there's kind of this theme that I'm hearing you talk about Amazon, which is Amazon's ability to look at its assets and repurpose them to its benefit and the benefit of its customers. So with this idea, for example, on supply chain, can you talk about how Amazon might think about something like that?
I think in general terms, we look at the innovations that Amazon has built on behalf of our customers as building blocks. And those building blocks can be configured in ways that support consumers. They can support Fortune 500, 1,000 companies, global 2,000 companies, or serve the government. And what we're committed to is arraying and configuring those building blocks in ways that meet our customers' needs, and that's a dialogue, and that's a partnership in building it together. And I think the way that procurement technology is going to advance is one way we can help. If you think about, for those of you familiar, we partner, by the way, with over 35 different e-procurement systems today at Amazon Business. So those organizations, those software providers, are very much a part of how we're serving our customers. But if you think about what a lot of those partners do today, is provide a catalog of things to buy. Well, Amazon can help in that space. We do that today pretty well. We're a company that's pretty good at getting something that someone's purchased from a warehouse to your door very quickly. In some instances, as fast as an hour now with things like Amazon Prime Now. So I think we want to look at all those different building blocks, the technology pieces, the logistics, the supply chain pieces, and put those together in ways that help government.
So you are in the education space a great deal. What have you learned there, in penetrating there and in that kind of state and local environment that you think you can leverage, in the federal space, which is where most of the audience resides, either as buyer or seller?
Well, I think higher education in particular is a great example of where the buyer has nearly complete autonomy. So one of my favorite quotes from a Tier 1 research university, I actually witnessed a interaction between a procurement professional and a principal investigator from a university. And they were going back and forth about the importance of centrally negotiated contracts and the efficiency and effectiveness that provides for an organization. And this is the procurement professional on one hand. And the principal investigator, on the other hand, was talking about the need for independence in research and academic freedom. And at one point, the researcher said, look, the day that you have a Nobel Prize hanging on your wall is the day you can tell me what to buy. It's a pretty sharp comment, right? But I think this creates higher education is a good example of maybe an extreme example of the consumerization of purchasing. Those researchers and faculty are going to go buy pretty much what they want, where they want, from whom they want. And I think one of the things we're learning there is how do we create there are goals of these central business and purchasing organizations. And so we are inferring from who a researcher is, what they're buying, what funding source they're using, some of the questions that need to be answered, and some of the compliance requirements from a competitive perspective, from an audit and reporting perspective that need to be there. And then we're building those features into the solution so that as opposed to buying something and then having to fill out 6 forms and go through 13 approval steps, it's a much more streamlined process. I think we're taking some of those learnings in education where we have extreme disconnects between the mission in some instances and the compliance components and beginning to drive those together.
So I get real worried about these big data models.
Yeah.
Okay. So the good ones are very virtuous, but the bad ones can be horrible. Because they can be ubiquitous, right? They're everywhere. They can be dangerous because they lead you to a bad set of decisions, and they can be very opaque to those who use them. So how do you build this? And you talk about building in compliance and these other things to kind of benefit this consumerization of the space here. But how do you do that and make sure that you are building virtuous as opposed to vicious big data analytics?
Yeah, I think it comes down to the people. And this is why Amazon is an enabler, not a holistic standalone solution. What does that mean? That means, I was at a conference not unlike this one about 2 months ago where someone came up to me afterwards and says, I don't know why Amazon's here. You're just here to take my job. And that, I think I share that with you because I think it's a concern I hear echoed from many procurement professionals. The idea is that Amazon's committed to, recognizes that the contracts that need to be sourced, the understanding of the mission, the unique terms and conditions that each individual agency and government department needs, there is a critical, central, and preeminent role of government contractors that will play in that. We also, to your point, need really, and this kind of comes back to those core competencies of the next generation of government contracting and procurement, we need leaders who are versed in how to use data models and predictive analytics to service the mission and versus those things, versus the reverse of those things, making decisions on behalf of the mission. And so I think it really it comes down to leadership competency, the leadership role of procurement and contracting professionals, and the view of the proper place and view of technology. I think we have an opportunity as an industry right now to decide, the consumerization of technology, big data, new data models, predictive analytics, machine learning, these things are here to stay. Are we going to embrace them and infuse government leadership and strategic thinking into those models, or are we going to sort of be victims of those? And I think we need to develop those competencies to take a leadership position.
So who gets to score you? I mean, if you think about these, data models, and I think about baseball, right?
Yeah.
Sabermetricians, right?
Yeah.
Well, every time, they make a prediction about, some scenario in baseball based on, the old data. Well, we check that, right? Because we can open the newspaper, we can check the box scores, we can load that into a spreadsheet and we can see if they were right or not. If they're not right, they fix their models.
Yeah.
So who's going to fix your model?
And users will. People will vote with their feet and their wallets. And if the products that we develop together between government and Amazon, or government and other companies who also do great jobs at using big data, our end customers, our respective end customers, those end users will tell us.
So there's there seems to me to be this real dynamic tension, though, in the way federal procurement kind of works. I think there's this perception, more than a perception, there's a policy statement that this is public money, that people should have access to it. People, for whatever reason, for public policy reasons like small businesses being the engine of growth, small disadvantaged businesses been, historically denied access to capital, need to have this opportunity from public funds. So I get concerned about that in terms of this data analytics issue. So are you, I mean, how do you not drive a race to the bottom, knowing what you know? What is it about, you would see in federal acquisition that may be different from your state and local experience that says, hey, we would need to maintain these set-asides, that we would need to kind of keep this race from the bottom? Because, I mean, you're heading toward that environment of perfect competition where marginal cost equal marginal revenue, and most people can't stay in business in that model.
The value, the key is value, not price. And value is the consultative and value-added services that a supplier brings to a government agency. It's the unique service models and terms and conditions and pricing that an organization or a contract manager is going to negotiate on behalf of an organization. So that's part of it. It's about providing total value. I think the other part of it is that we see an opportunity for really a public-private partnership to enable, to use data, to use the choice of an open marketplace or negotiated contracts. And I want to be clear, Amazon supports both centrally negotiated contracts and this open dynamic marketplace concept. But I think we need to use those tools to create economic development opportunities for our small and local and socioeconomically diverse companies. Mm-hmm. I mentioned before, Elliott, that Amazon has over 2 million sellers, and not all of those are appropriate for government purposes. We're going to continue to put signaling and guidance around and certifications around those sellers to make sure that they're appropriate for a government agency to buy from on our marketplace. But there's an amazing story here when we can take a small business that's selling to a state government, or maybe has or selling to the federal government or an education institution. And today they might have, their aperture of sales might be very narrowly focused in serving those government agencies. And then you bring them onto a marketplace like Amazon's that has global reach and scale, that provides tools for those businesses that are designed for how they work to find new revenue sources, to find new customers that they might not have ever known that they could have even served. You provide fulfillment capabilities so that those organizations don't have the administrative and operational burden of serving all these new customers. You provide seller financing that helps drive the cash flow challenges that some of these organizations have. We have now partnered by government and Amazon partnering to bring these suppliers onto our marketplace. We have now created real measurable economic development opportunity for those organizations. And I think that's one of the ways, just an example of the ways Amazon and government can partner.
So you want to provide this to me as a service, but how are you going to help me with my biggest procurement challenge today, which is the fact that the federal government probably buys more in services than it does in commodities. So now I'm dealing with something that is very, very unique, and when you talk about value proposition, that can be a very, very intricate determination. So how does this technology, or does this technology help me with that particular challenge as I start to look at things as small as drones, mm-hmm. okay, which we in DoD by the way buy as a service. We have people who put that up and we basically say, hey, we want to buy so many hours over this geographic area. We just want the footage. You own the drone. Okay. To the Navy Marine Corps Internet, which is the largest network in the free world, 400,000 seats, 800,000 users. So how are you going to help me buy that stuff, which is becoming increasingly important in the government space?
So let me start with where we are today. Amazon Business can support purchasing off of this open, dynamic, competitive marketplace. And for certain highly unitized, commoditized goods, mm-hmm. That might be a great solution. We have to make sure that complies with the appropriate laws and regulations, the compliance part that I've talked about. And for many of those commodity categories, services may not be as crucial and central. But we also recognize that there are categories that are strategically sourced and negotiated that have very complex services attached. It's sort of those products are indivisible from those services. We call them attached services. So an example is a laptop or a desktop piece of hardware. I could probably go find it, pick an organization. I could probably go find that laptop cheaper on Amazon than I could find it in my centrally negotiated contract. But the reality is there's a set of break-fix services and pre-delivery imaging that goes onto that laptop.
Old disk, yeah.
All those things and the security and information security components that are baked into that. And those are the attached services that I'm talking about. And we want to enable those contracts that organizations have negotiated. You can purchase the physical good off of through the Amazon marketplace at the price that's been negotiated by your agency. Or department, but the seller of that will still honor those services in terms and conditions of pricing that you negotiated. And then I think as we continue to innovate on behalf of our customers, we'll think about things that we call the unattached services. So these are all the services that might not be tied to a specific physical good. And I think as we, we're constantly looking at those opportunities as we innovate on behalf of customers.
Okay, so you're getting into this space. And I'm sure next week, well, maybe after Christmas, the guys from FedBid are going to come see me. They do our reverse auctioning thing and say, hey, we've got first mover advantage. You don't need those Amazon guys to help you out here. And then I know the guys from GSA are going to show up and say, hey, GSA Advantage will work just fine. So how is it exactly you're differentiating yourself from the folks that are in this space already? And really kind of building a value proposition that caused me as a senior, policy guy to say, yeah, we ought to take a look at that.
We have a lot of respect for the both incumbent and new players in the federal procurement market. We learn a lot from them. In general at Amazon, we spend almost no time thinking about our competition. That's a great way. It's a great way to continue to sort of incrementally innovate. And we really are focused on our customer. And I think where we'll differentiate ourselves, how you should measure. You talked about how you're going to measure Amazon. I think it needs to be the degree to which and the speed at which we can meet the needs of government customers. And I think you look at the areas. What do we hear from customers that they love about Amazon Business today? This solution we've launched just a little bit over a year ago that has, the last time we published numbers, over 400,000 registrations now, and was growing in our first year 20% month over month. What we've heard as we've gotten feedback from customers is it's that end user experience. It's that ability to have a delightful experience. Imagine that, a delightful experience, finding the things that you need to satisfy your mission. And what we're equally committed to is having a delightful experience to provide tools and technologies and enablers for our contracting and procurement persona to make sure that we are compliant, that we're meeting the overall organizational needs, not just an individual end user's transactional needs. Those are the ways that we'll continue to differentiate ourselves.
Mm-hmm. So there are landmines out there for me, and they make you shake your head sometimes. Absolutely. So in DoD, running shoes are a landmine for us because there's only one domestic maker of those, and that's just recent. Hand tools are a landmine, for us because we have Buy American Act, we have things like the Berry Amendment that say, thou shalt not go offshore for these things unless you do. We once had we have prohibited sources. The Chinese can be prohibited sources. We had an issue with ammunition at one point because they had Chinese plastic tips on them. I mean, the amount of churn that caused was incredible. So what's your role in helping to police that vendor community? So we make sure that guys like me don't have to go over the hill and explain, well, what happened was, we bought this off of Amazon. Right. Okay.
Would that be a career limiting moment?
Well, for someone, not probably me. I'm retirement eligible, so that's actually why they asked me to do this. I am retirement eligible.
Right. Look, it goes back to the fundamental, kind of that core principle that what is the role of any technology company, including but not limited to Amazon? Our role is not to be a policymaker. It's not to be a rule maker. There are very competent, capable, seasoned people in this room and in this city. And in state capitals and city and county government seats throughout this country. They're very good at that. Our job is to create a set of configurable, flexible technology solutions that ensure that when an individual is buying, they're complying with those. And we want to do that in a way that doesn't recreate the 13-step approval process or just take that giant warehouse that stores all the audit reports and digitize that, but does that in a way that is fundamentally transformational in the way that individuals buy. So are there restricted items? Are there debarred and blacklisted vendors? Are there questions about sourcing? Absolutely. And we are committed to providing a set of tools that allows an organization, because there's not a one-size-fits-all for this, right? The second you build that, the hardwire and hard code that compliance into a technology system, which I think is the kind of the traditional model, right? Sure. You build in a very rigid set of rules. Those rules change, and you try to take that system from one jurisdiction or locale to another, and it doesn't. Or even department, the federal government, it doesn't work. And so our first principle, our design sort of mental model, is to create a configurable set of tools so that we can accommodate those requirements.
So we're horrible at IT. I mean, we're just absolutely miserable at it. Because what we do, and I've seen this in a couple of places, our enterprise resource planning systems, and as we try to buy commercial healthcare solutions, we stand up and bravely say, we're going to change the way we do business to use this commercial product. I heard a snicker. Did you hear the snicker out there when I said that? And then, of course, we deploy it, and then somebody says, well, it doesn't quite work. Could you change this? I finally refer to them as Rice Fest, reports, interfaces, customization, extensions. So you got to be clear-eyed with us. What have we got to change about our process to really take advantage of the technology you're bringing to the table? Because we're under no illusions that we get to do business the way we're doing.
I think it really is, change management is the hardest part of what we're talking about here. I generally could bifurcate most of my conversations in the public sector, including many government conversations I've had over the past year working in Amazon Business, in two categories. One mindset shift is, I'm here to control. As a government contracting and procurement official, my job is to control. I keep the Amazons and the consumerization of procurement at bay. I am here to identify the set of vendors and suppliers, and even down to items that are approved, versus I am here to understand and create, not just as a one-time event of identifying demand, but create repeatable, scalable mechanisms for how to identify demand, emergent, existing demand, the whole thing, and connect that with the most efficient and effective, trustworthy, and compliant suppliers. There are many wonderful leaders that I've met who have that second mentality, but it's not universal. And so I think one of the things you talk about, what are the things that where there's lots of things that Amazon needs to continue to build and change and innovate on. I think one of the areas for government opportunity is beginning to rethink what is. It comes back to that first principles comment again. What is the role of contracting and procurement? Fundamentally, not being tethered to the old ways of doing things. But that takes time. Change takes time. And I think it requires a level of patience.
So without asking you about your technology roadmap, because I don't want to get you fired, so what kind of generally, in terms of functionality, would you say you really need to be thinking about to get us where you'd like us to be?
I think I'd love to have that conversation, actually, with the folks in this room. Us sitting in Seattle or Austin or Boston or DC and in a technology office having a conversation about what we need to go build. And the next set of things is really sort of secondary and uninteresting compared to what are the real mission needs. So I apologize to be so rude as to answer a question with a question, but I think it's a dialogue that we need to have. I think we need to create mechanisms of how can we leverage this marketplace that exists already in the form of Amazon? And to your point, there are other companies that do this well as well.
No, and
sort of infuse. So.
No, I'll give you. I mean, I'll give you some examples. So one thing I think is just we've got to have robust distributed technology. I mean, if you go back to a lot of our contract writing solutions, especially in DoD, many of the ones we're retiring now. Well. Hell, some of the ones we're retiring now are COBOL, okay? Mm-hmm. And we have to literally get programmers with walkers to come out and continue to patch them up. The good ones are fat client, compute intensive, on the desktop solution. So, we're looking at a workforce, I believe, that is extremely mobile. Mm-hmm. Okay, that needs access anytime, that needs that access to respond to the agency customer. So we need things that can run in data centers, run efficiently in data centers, do that back-end processing. We need probably an infrastructure solution. I'm looking at, I'm the functional proponent for my organization's next generation contract writing system. And the thing that frankly scares me to death is the size of the pipe we're going to need to get to 6,000 critical users and 15,000 users literally across the globe. The other thing that concerns me is the integrity of the code, okay? Because we are moving to data centers. People have figured out I can create virtual machines in a data center and I can run a lights out operation, but I'm going to tell you, having coded, that means that my code needs to be really well behaved. And in an object-oriented environment where the level of abstraction between the actual hardware and the functionality on that code is very, very high, I have to have a high degree of confidence that I can migrate those things into that infrastructure. And finally, I don't want the Chinese or the Russians reading any of this, because that piece of big data scares me to death. Okay, because what happens is if I can go exfiltrate data out of a contracting system, even though it's not classified, that's kind of like the Sears Roebuck catalog. I know what my government is interested in. Yep. And by the way, with information tied to who an industry is working on that, is the phone book to the address of where I want to go exfiltrate next. So these are some of the things that we're thinking about, mobility, anywhere, anytime, size of the pipe, data center consolidation, which drives you to well-behaved apps, and security.
Yeah, no, I think, you hit the big three, right? Systems need to meet users where they are, and that's increasingly mobile, and that sort of mobile-centric, mobile-first component is important. Extensibility and scalability is really what organizations like Amazon Web Services enable. And then that sort of information security and cybersecurity are critical to protecting the investments. I think those are, maybe not in a traditional sense, front and center in the efficient and effective procurement of goods and services. But we need to make sure that we're building systems that are adaptable enough and meet those kind of three core tenets that you just outlined. I think we agree.
Okay. So how are you going to help me develop my workforce then, and when do I get them back from you? Yeah. I'm very, very serious. So we have a lot of millennials. Yep. Okay. Many of whom, you start to think about it, the next generation coming up won't know a time when Amazon wasn't the storefront. Yep. So they're going to be very, very, so you're going to be a brand presence in their head. They're going to come into our workplace and, expect to see your products and expect to see your offerings and your technology. So how are you going to work with those millennials, to help them shape this world, I think, on both sides of that revolving door, both in government and industry? Have you guys thought about that? Are you willing to do that?
Something we, and I think about a lot. I'm not sure that, Amazon would certainly be honored to play a role in that. I think more generally, there is a need to invest, and it's going to be, it needs to be patient investment, I think, Elliott, in developing real career paths. Yours is a tremendous example of how you have had a career both in public service and private practice of really delivering value and innovating at every step and stage in your career. Yours is not the typical path and not the typical example. And I think we need to pull together as a public sector community. Those are government agencies and leaders that are in place today to identify and cultivate talent with academia to begin to train that next generation, not just in the transactional and tactical skills that they need to negotiate a contract or manage a supply chain, but what are the fundamental kind of philosophies and role of a government procurement professional. And then I think private sector and Amazon is today with things we're doing with Amazon Educate, with some of the things we're thinking about. We bring in students both in primary and secondary and post-secondary and even graduate context frequently into our Seattle offices and around the world to begin to train and enable those individuals in best practice supply chain and technology practices. But I think it's a combination of public sector organizations, academia, and private sector technology companies coming together to be very intentional and thoughtful. And I think organizations like NCMA can play a role in having that convening power to think about what that looks like and how you begin to institutionalize some of those investments. It's critical, I think, to the future of our industries.
Okay. So America's a great place. I mean, it just absolutely is. There are, the political stability that we have here, the sense of innovation, the respect for the rule of law, the ability to raise capital are some of the things that made Amazon successful. In addition to just kind of the vision and genius of its original team, and the people who defended that are veterans. So where do veterans fit into Amazon's vision of a company that lives in America and then moves to serve the public sector?
Thank you for asking that question, by the way. This is something that's very important to me personally. It's also important to our company. Veterans are critical to our hiring practices and our workforce, and that is throughout this country. In nearly every community and near every large urban center in this country, we have operations and fulfillment centers. Increasingly, we have development offices, research and development practices, and veteran hiring and our veteran workforce is core. Secondly, we're very committed to promoting veteran-owned businesses. We are now have the ability for organizations to identify who is a veteran seller, veteran-owned business and seller on Amazon Business, and promote those organizations to create economic opportunity for veterans, in addition to other vendor and supplier types. And then I think we will continue to serve the organizations that serve our veterans. So if you look at the big industry verticals, the big bets that Amazon Business is making on who we're serving, it's education, government, and healthcare.
Okay.
And you look at the sort of convergence and overlap areas in there, and we are very committed to serving the organizations in those industries that support and serve our veterans, and helping those organizations be more efficient and effective in what they purchase so they can focus on that core veteran mission.
Right. So you talked about the ability to identify the veteran-owned business on the platform today, and clearly we're following our workforce's leadership to your house. So what about the ability to identify as SBA certified companies as well? Can we do that on the platform?
Yes. So you have the ability to identify those individuals, those what we call sellers or those suppliers or vendors, and then also report out on the purchases that were made on Amazon Business from those suppliers.
So we can get that kind of data.
Yeah, we're really committed to creating, again, it comes back to that core principle of transparency, that we want to create transparency of who you're buying from, both before you buy and after you buy.
And I certainly appreciate the ability of that platform to get to those two groups, because again, that's one of the groups that we're committed to as a government. and need to report to the stakeholders on. But I want to shift topics for a minute. I want to go back to, you talked about the purchase card earlier, and I'll just give you a slightly different perspective. So in 1994, when I came to the senior contracting officer job in Navy, we did 2 million transactions a year. Okay, when I left that job in 1999, we were down to 500,000 and counting. And they didn't go away, they moved to the purchase card.
Yeah.
So for you to kind of tell me that you may not want me to use that the way I use that today makes me a little bit nervous. How could we perhaps, shape that into the data analytics strategy so that I don't have a workforce, bringing more transactions, even if they are off of centralized contracts.
Right.
And again, leave the user, that researcher with the sense he's empowered because he's got a purchase card in his hand.
No, we think purchase cards, first of all, were very much a part of the origin story of government purchases on Amazon.com. They're the by far predominant way that government agencies today spend on Amazon Business. We're a big believer in purchasing cards, I think for 2 reasons. One, it creates nimbleness and flexibility for organizations to buy the things that they need, and it supports that end user choice and nimbleness. But I also view purchase cards as almost the AWAC of government purchasing, right? It's sort of an early, but it's fascinating. So, how does Amazon Business work today? The way it works today is that you take all these individual sort of purchases that have been happening on Amazon.com, you throw a net all over them, you move all those individual Amazon.com purchases over to this new account type that we've created called Amazon Business, and now there's one umbrella organization for your division or your department or agency to have all of your purchases contained in one place on Amazon Business. And for the most part, individuals who have placed orders on the Amazon.com side on their P card, all that transactional history and data moves over into one central place. And day one, you have level 3 visibility into what's being spent. That's really powerful. And I think when you talked earlier about some of the surprises that we had as we've gotten into the government space. One of them is not a surprise that Amazon has had, but one that our customers have had of what's actually being purchased off Amazon. And in some instances, when you have that central visibility and all the data and analytics from the P card transactions in one place that you can slice and dice or put into your transactional systems, you begin to identify patterns of items that should be purchased off a central contract, and that gives contracting professionals and procurement professionals the ability to transition that spend off of Amazon to the centrally negotiated contracts where they probably belong. But it also enables those same professionals to see patterns of things that are purchased that you never realized were being purchased in your organization. So it's a much richer data. So we're big believers in using purchase cards as one tool and the data that purchase cards provides as one tool in an overall kind of sourcing strategy.
So are you looking to penetrate our industrial base? Because when I think about Navy procurement, right? If we run a report of product service code, at a reasonable size that a middle-aged guy like me can actually, read and understand, 80% of our spend is on the first page and a half of a 35-page report. So in order for me to get the benefits of what you're doing, I need you to go talk to the people I do big business with. Sure. So how are you thinking about approaching perhaps some of these material management, material procurement organizations in the large companies that serve the government?
We're really committed to servicing the indirect spend of organizations. And we'll do that in 2 ways. In some instances, categories that you would, from a consumer perspective, think of Amazon.com, the consumer experience for. We have tremendous selection, long-standing relationships with manufacturers and suppliers of goods, in addition to the third-party suppliers that we have on our marketplace. But we're also here, again, this comes back to this theme, Elliott, of enabling and supporting the way that procurement is done today and partnering to improve it. We recognize that there are these strategic vendors and suppliers and partners that government agencies have had for a long time. And we're here to enable the relationship that exists between government and those suppliers, not replace it.
Right.
What does that look like? I'll give you an example. Let's go back to the lab and scientific categories for a moment. There may be suppliers that you've had longstanding relationships in those commodity categories that provide tremendous value-added services. And we want to enable that contract with the terms and conditions, the pricing, the value-added services that you have that make up the first page and a half of the list of items. Enable a really easy transacting and finding and ordering of those items through Amazon's e-commerce marketplace. But maintaining the relationship between that government agency and that supplier directly. Amazon becomes a support mechanism and a purchasing mechanism in that instance, not one that is there to replace those relationships of those items.
Okay. So we really appreciate the time you spent with us here today. And we'll just kind of wrap this up with one last question and get you off the stage. So we use you now for doing what we call price analysis. So we may buy something a different way, but then we go up on Amazon and we kind of check the price and say, yeah, it kind of looks right, pot's right. So we really appreciate that because that's absolutely critical. I mean, that is absolutely critical to our business. I mean, the fundamental function of a contracting officer is to ensure that we get a fair and reasonable price for things. So when we look down the road to 2025, so what does Amazon look like? Do we still get to do that, or will you be so embedded in our business we won't need to?
Look, I think anyone with a crystal ball to talk about what 2025 looks like, especially at a company that innovates at the pace of Amazon, is quite a prognosticator. But I think what I would say is that we are committed to transparency, which is one of the things that aids in that in the activity that you talked about today. We're committed to creating an open and dynamic marketplace that also has the right at times the right contracts that have been centrally negotiated. It's an open dynamic marketplace, and so I think what we are very focused on is again that core principle of what procurement does of identifying. Creating increasingly efficient and helpful tools for identifying that demand, connecting it with supply, helping drive efficiency in the delivery of those goods. That's what we've been focused on in the consumer side, and those are some of the tools that we believe in partnership and discussion and dialogue with government and public sector agencies that we can continue to innovate in that space as well. And we're really excited. We're honored to be there. We have this saying, Elliott, at Amazon that it's day one. Every day is sort of that keeps that entrepreneurial, innovative spirit. Every day for us is day one, and it is absolutely day one for us in the government procurement space. So we're excited to partner and continue to bridge that gap of where we are today, and interesting to see where we'll be in 2025.
Great. Well, Daniel, I've especially enjoyed sitting here having a conversation with you for about an hour, and I'm sure the audience has benefited from that dialogue. So we want to thank you for coming out here and wish you safe travels on the way home. Why don't we give Daniel a round of applause?
Thank you.
Oh, absolutely.